Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Before I dive into the revenge, let me start by saying this. The third party involved and I are still friends, and we talk to this day. Also, English isn't my first language, but I'm working on it. This happened about 5 years ago when I thought I had the perfect life. Great house, great husband, great car, great job. The American dream. Soon that dream turned into a nightmare when I discovered my husband Jake was cheating on me. It started small with the typical signs, coming home late, ignoring my attempts to get intimate, making excuses, and so on. Then one day I had a hunch to go through his phone. Big mistake on my part. Not only was Jake cheating on me, but he was doing so with a guy. I'm fine with the LGBTQ+ community, and I don't have a problem with my husband wanting to explore other sides. The issue was that he didn't have the guts to tell me what he was doing. I tracked down the other guy, Alex, and we became fast friends. Through Alex, I found out that Jake had a Grindr account, a gay dating app, and had hooked up with multiple guys. Together, Alex and I came up with a plan. Alex tricked Jake into agreeing to meet at a hotel room that night for some alone time. In the process, he gathered some very incriminating evidence of Jake's infidelity. Thanks to my father, I had a prenup that terminated our marriage if there was evidence of unfaithfulness. My clueless ex-husband showed up while I was hiding in the bathroom. Alex played his part well, telling Jake he was going to the bathroom to freshen up. That's when I came out, with the evidence and the prenup, the relevant section highlighted in the contract. I confronted Jake. "So, this is what you've been up to behind my back?" Jake's face went pale. "Maria, I can explain." "Save it," I cut him off. "I'm getting everything and you're done for." Jake tried to stammer out a response, but he ended up bolting from the room. The fallout. When I took Jake to court for the divorce hearings, I requested the house and his car since it was in my name. Thanks to my father's foresight, I was the primary breadwinner of our family, so I got what I wanted and kept my assets. Jake lost everything but his beat-up Honda and his clothes. He tried going back to Alex, now my good friend, but that didn't work out. During the court proceedings, Jake tried to plead his case. "Your Honor, I made a mistake. I shouldn't lose everything because of it." My lawyer countered, "Your Honor, the prenuptial agreement is clear. Mr. Thompson's infidelity nullifies any claim he has to marital assets." The judge nodded. "I'm inclined to agree. The evidence is quite damning, Mr. Thompson." In the end, Jake had to move back in with his parents, and I think he's working at a big box store now. Last I heard, anyway. I don't really care. Hell hath no fury like a Latina scorned. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be writing one of these crazy neighbor stories, but here I am. It all started about 6 months ago when a new family moved in next door. At first, everything seemed normal. They introduced themselves, we exchanged pleasantries, typical new neighbor stuff. The mom, who I'll call Karen, not her real name, seemed nice enough initially. I have a decent-sized backyard with a shed near the property line. It's nothing fancy, just a basic 10x12 metal shed where I store my lawn equipment, tools, that kind of thing. I've had it for years without any issues. About a month after Karen and her family moved in, I was doing some yard work on a Saturday afternoon. I needed to grab my hedge trimmer from the shed, so I unlocked it and went inside like I've done 1,000 times before. As I'm rummaging around looking for the trimmer, I hear an angry voice behind me. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing in my shed?" I turn around and see Karen standing there with her hands on her hips looking furious. I was completely confused. This is my shed," I said. "I'm just grabbing a tool." Karen scoffed. "No, this is clearly on my property. It belongs to me now. You need to leave immediately before I call the police for breaking and entering." I was dumbfounded. Was this lady for real? I tried to stay calm and explain. "Karen, I've lived here for 10 years. This shed has been here the whole time. It's definitely on my property and belongs to me." But Karen wasn't having it. She insisted the shed was now hers since it was obviously on her side of the property line. I knew for a fact this wasn't true. The shed was a good 5 feet inside my property line. But Karen refused to listen to reason. "I'm giving you 1 minute to get out of my shed and off my property before I call cop," she threatened. Not wanting to escalate things, I decided to just leave the shed for now and deal with this later. As I walked away, Karen yelled after me, "And don't you dare come back here again! Next time I'll have you arrested!" I was pretty rattled by the whole encounter. I couldn't believe the nerve of this woman, trying to claim my shed as her own. I figured she must just be confused about where the property line was. Surely once I showed her the proper documentation, she'd realize her mistake and apologize. Boy, was I wrong. The next day I went over to Karen's house to try to clear things up. I brought my property survey and deed to show her exactly where the boundaries were. I knocked on the door and Karen answered, immediately glaring at me. "What do you want? I told you to stay off my property." I took a deep breath. "Karen, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the property line. I brought some documents to show you where—" She cut me off. "There's no misunderstanding. That shed is on my land, end of story. I don't need to see your fake documents." "They're not fake," I said, getting frustrated. "This is the official survey from when I bought the house. It clearly shows—" "I don't care what it shows," Karen yelled. "I know what I see with my own eyes. That shed is mine now and you need to accept it. Now get off my porch before I call the cops." She slammed the door in my face. I stood there in shock for a moment before walking away. I couldn't believe how unreasonable she was being. I decided I needed to take steps to protect myself and my property. The next day, I called a local surveyor to come out and officially mark the property line. I also contacted a lawyer friend for advice. He suggested sending Karen a certified letter explaining the situation and demanding she cease making false claims about my property. A few days later, the surveyor came out and placed markers along the property line. As expected, they confirmed my shed was well within my property. I took photos and video to document everything. That weekend, I decided to mow my lawn and do some other yard work. I made sure to very obviously use tools from my shed, hoping Karen would see and realize her mistake. Sure enough, I was barely 10 minutes into mowing when I heard screeching tires. Karen came flying into her driveway and stormed over to me. "I told you to stay out of my shed," she screamed. "That's it, I'm calling the police right now." Before I could even respond, she whipped out her phone and dialed 911. I couldn't believe she was actually calling the cops over this. I shut off my mower and waited, figuring it was best to let the police sort this out. About 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers got out and approached us. Karen immediately launched into a tirade. "Officers, I need you to arrest this man for breaking and entering. He keeps trespassing in my shed and stealing my property." The officers looked confused. One of them turned to me. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" I calmly laid out the situation. How Karen had moved in recently and suddenly started claiming my shed was hers, despite it being well within my property line. I showed them the survey markers that had just been placed. "I have documentation proving this is my property," I said. "I'm happy to show you." The officers nodded and asked to see my paperwork. I retrieved my deed, property survey, and the recent letter from my lawyer. They looked it all over carefully. Meanwhile, Karen was getting more and more agitated. "Those documents are fake! He forged them! You need to arrest him right now!" The officers ignored her outbursts and continued reviewing my paperwork. After a few minutes, one of them turned to Karen. "Ma'am, all of this documentation clearly shows that the shed is on this gentleman's property. Do you have any evidence to support your claim that it belongs to you?" Karen sputtered indignantly. "Evidence? I don't need evidence. I can see with my own eyes that shed is on my land." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, property lines aren't always obvious to the naked eye. That's why we have official surveys and documentation. Based on everything we've seen, this shed legally belongs to your neighbor. You have no right to prevent him from accessing it." Karen's face turned bright red. "This is ridiculous! I'm going to sue all of you!" She stormed off toward her house. The officers turned back to me with apologetic looks. "We're sorry about this, sir," one said. "You're well within your rights to use your shed. If she continues to harass you, don't hesitate to call us." I thanked them for their help. As they were leaving, Karen came marching back out of her house with a stack of papers. "Wait!" she yelled. "I have proof the shed is mine." The officers stopped and waited for her to catch up. Karen thrust the papers at them triumphantly. "See, this is the deed to my house. It says I own all structures on the property." The officer glanced at the paper and shook his head. "Ma'am, this just says you own structures on your property. It doesn't mean you own your neighbor's shed. Please stop making false claims before you get yourself in legal trouble." Karen stood there speechless as the police drove away. She glared at me with pure hatred before storming back into her house. I hoped that would be the end of it, but Karen wasn't done yet. Over the next few weeks, she continued to harass me every time I went near the shed. She'd scream at me from her yard, threatening to sue me or have me arrested. A few times, she even tried to physically block me from entering the shed. After about the 10th incident, I'd finally had enough. I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to pursue legal action. He agreed it was time to put a stop to Karen's behavior. We filed a lawsuit against Karen for harassment and interfering with my property rights. We also requested a restraining order to keep her away from my shed and the property line. When Karen was served with the lawsuit, she predictably freaked out. She started posting all over social media about how I was bullying her and trying to steal her land. She even put up signs in her yard calling me a property thief. Thankfully, the judge saw right through her antics. At the hearing, Karen tried to claim adverse possession, saying she'd been openly using the shed as her own. The judge pointed out she'd only lived there for a few months, nowhere near long enough for adverse possession. He also wasn't impressed with her homemade deed that she presented as evidence. In the end, the judge ruled entirely in my favor. Karen was ordered to stop harassing me and stay at least 20 feet away from my shed and property line. She was also required to pay my legal fees and a small amount in damages. Karen threw an absolute fit in the courtroom, screaming about corruption and threatening to appeal. The judge warned her that any further harassment would result in contempt charges. It's been about a month since the court ruling. Karen has mostly left me alone, though I still catch her glaring at me from her window sometimes when I'm in the yard. I'm just glad I can finally use my shed in peace again. The whole experience was incredibly frustrating and stressful. I still can't believe someone would be so entitled as to try to steal a shed right off their neighbor's property. I'm sharing my story as a warning to others. Document everything and don't be afraid to take legal action if you have a neighbor like Karen. The next one is a petty revenge story. My significant other and I really wanted to pull behind Camper, and Camperland had a good deal. We did not do our research on Camperland and went in raw. During the tour, we were discussing financing options and we were told we would not have any payments for 60 days. When we were sitting down setting up financing, we mentioned the 60 days and we were acknowledged and we kept on going. After we finished, we put up the paperwork and hooked up and went home. 24 days later, I get a phone call from the financing company. They wanted to know when we would be paying our bill. I explained we were told we had 60 days. She replied with something on the lines of, "We don't offer any sort of delay. The day you take it home is the day financing begins." Whack. After explaining the situation to the really good CSR, not even being sarcastic, she even sided with me, even commented about how scummy this is. No sweat, let me call the dealership. Once I had the sales manager on the line, I explained the mix-up, and he said he needed to call me back. They never called. 2 days later, I gave them a call and was starting to get the runaround. Gave them a really bad review, and then he called me back, said they never mentioned this and we misheard. My wife and I, who both heard this, told them we are only moving forward with the deal due to the 60 days. We wouldn't have proceeded if the 60 days wasn't an option. We escalated this as high as we can go, and there was never any resolution. No negotiation, apology, or discount, nothing. It's not much, definitely not anything above petty. But every time I see an ad for Camping World on Facebook or wherever I copy my review, paste it, tag the user, which is usually a bot. But someone always reaches out, asks for more details, and it always gets escalated. I always act like this is nothing new to me and see how high I can go before hitting a wall. Sorry, there's nothing we can do. You'll be better off contacting the financing company. I've called the financing company and the first person I would get connected to knew there was no reason to escalate. Not their fault I was lied to. They've been nothing but pleasant. I also randomly send the Camping World user on Messenger random photos. Here's the album. The next one is a malicious compliance story. All these stories about vacations and/or annual leave reminded me of something that happened to one of my workmates a few years ago. A new manager was hired for our team and quickly he wanted to impose his way of doing things, daily stand-up meetings, people having lunch at different times, etc. So he didn't start off well with most people in our team. Then he started going after people who had accumulated annual leave. Here in Australia, you get 20 days annual leave per year. I had none left, so no problem with me. But this friend of mine had been working there for nearly 8 and never took a day off. He had months worth of annual leave. This manager wanted to make an example of him and ordered him to plan out vacations and/or sell back to the company some of that time. Perfectly legal, but with tons of conditions. My friend didn't want to take any time off, but was being pressured constantly by our manager. Every day at our stand-up meetings, the first item would always be pending annual leave and would just fixate on my friend. One day, my friend just had enough of this guy and gave him 2 options. He told him he wanted to go for extended holidays back to his country and take it all at once, or sell the whole thing back to the company. The manager accepted the first option. only to come back next day after checking with his manager to say that wasn't possible as he would have to go for nearly 6 months and we had plenty of projects in the pipeline. Then he said you'll have to sell the whole thing back to the company, only to come back the next day after checking with HR. One of the conditions says that you can only sell a maximum of 20 days. QMC. From that day onwards, every morning my friend started emailing our manager, copying HR and the head of our department, asking him for an update on his annual leave arrangements. Stating he had given him the options he was looking for and was waiting for his response. He would also bring it up and push for an answer every day at our stand-up meetings. He never got a reply from our manager, but weeks later got a reply from the head of our department indicating they will review other options and let him know. They never did. The following year, my friend had his first daughter and ended up taking extended leave then, 3 months. The pushy manager had already resigned as he never felt comfortable in the team and found another job somewhere else. The next one is an entitled people story. This is an old story, but I was reminded of this when I read a Gen X is the worst post. I am 36F, but this happened when I was 18. Things may seem off, but remember this was the early 2000s. That time was a crazy time. For this, I will call my boss, main boss, entitled boss, and second boss, nice boss. When I was 18, my 37M, entitled boss, was a tyrant. He lived life on easy mode. College was cheap for him, and he didn't have to pay because his dad could cover it. His business was even started on him having advantages over his employees in life. He couldn't see that though because he felt he worked for it. He did not get how his millennial employees were struggling with what we were paid. We were getting paid $5 an hour, which I know for a fact was below minimum wage at the time. I didn't complain though because I needed a job. Living in NY is expensive, but it is hard to leave NY when your family is broke. At the time I just started college. He knew that and agreed to me having Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off, so I can go to school and have at least one day to myself. I needed to save towards paying off student loans and eventually getting my own place. My parents were not bad, but could not afford paying for me to go to college and covering basic expenses. Lucky for me, I did get a scholarship and grants, but it did not cover everything. So I needed a job. Part of my money went to household expenses and my needs, along with attempting to save for my future, so I got this job. I thought since my boss agreed to this and was younger, I wouldn't have issues. I thought it would be okay, but I was wrong. My entitled boss worked the younger employees to the bone. We only had 10-minute breaks for meals and barely got any time for ourselves. Bathroom trips were even timed. He had no sympathy. Even if a woman was pregnant, we were scared of upsetting him, because he would go from friendly to crazy at the drop of a dime. One girl who worked there quit, she wanting more than one day to bury her grandmother. He told her, "Why are you crying? Your grandma was old. When I lost my grandparents, I didn't even take a day off. I just kept working. Kids now are too sensitive. The real world isn't going to coddle you, sweetheart. One day or you're fired." She tossed her name badge at him and left. That girl was brave. I noticed that even with my regular hours, I was struggling to get by, so I looked for small gigs I can do on my work days that wouldn't conflict with my work hours. So I found one that worked. I worked part-time at a small craft store in my neighborhood. It was after my main job hours and by my house. My main job was a 7-11 BTW. I kept it hush because I knew if this guy knew I was working somewhere else, he would get mad that I requested 3 days off during the week. However, a regular of our store let it slip while she thanked me. He knew now that I was working at the craft store as well. So the entitled boss had a meltdown. During my break, he called me to the office. He demanded I quit my second job to be on call for my main one. He wanted me to work longer hours, but wouldn't give me a raise or overtime to compensate for the extra time I might have been working, which was not guaranteed, by the way. I needed guaranteed money. So what incentive did I have to quit my second job? I needed extra money. My nice boss was paying me $6.50 for 3 hours 4 days a week. When I said no, I need the job for basic expenses, my entitled boss said, "Don't you live with your parents? Kind of pathetic. What expenses do you have? When I was your age, I already had my first home and was paying a mortgage. You just work here and go to college. Wait till you have to pay a mortgage and take care of kids. So you either quit or you're fired." I was annoyed. He was not paying me extra. He was not entitled to my time. He used up my only break to tell me to be broke because he thinks I am leeching off my parents. I said, "No, entitled boss, I will not quit if you aren't giving me steady hours or a pay increase. Why should I leave my second job?" IDK why he didn't get I am an adult. I had to pay towards my student loans, my phone, transportation, and food. He had no sympathy, and after that shift, he fired me. He expected me to bend to him, but I didn't. He was an a-hole and made my life hell even after I was fired. I couldn't even put that place on my resume because if I did, he would tell potential employers I am lazy and stole food. So I put the nice boss, 55F at the time, as my previous employer. She was a much nicer person. I told her what happened. She gave me a little more hours at the craft store, and that helped till the end of the semester. When I was looking for work, she gave me a good recommendation. She was the sweetest woman, R.I.P. Leanne. Not all boomers are amazing, but my nice boss and my parents were superstars in my eyes. They all helped me have a better life. I had to pause my education because it took a while to get a new job. I needed to save up to continue. Eventually found a better paying job at a clinic. My nice boss wished me good luck in my future. Years later, I was about 28 and I see this guy's store for sale. I was so happy when I saw that guy's store shut down. I asked around and my old coworker said, nobody wanted to work for him because he was such a jerk. He started hiring undocumented workers and got in trouble for that. His wife left him for cheating on her with a 20-year-old. He got fined so much he had to sell his home just to cover the fines and alimony. Apparently he moved in with his parents. I laughed because this guy gave me hell for living with my parents. He was now divorced and living off of his boomer parents. This was hilarious. By then I was a pastry chef making good money in Manhattan, so the universe was saying, here you go, girl. I saw it as karma. I was told I could sue him, but at the time I really didn't have the time or money to do that. But fate made this man feel it in the end, so I let it all go and moved forward. Now I am in my own place with my loving partner. I am almost the same age as my entitled boss was when I was fired. God knows I will never treat kids the way my entitled boss treated me. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.